Hello, everyone. This series is a follow up to our study in the book of Colossians titled The Post Truth Pandemic. In that series, we examined Paul's response to attacks against the nature and works of Christ. And the goal of the study was to demonstrate the relevancy of Paul's responses to our present day situation. More specifically, that Paul's response to the Colossian church is the antidote to the current crisis of truth. So Paul responds to these false teachings with this statement found in Colossians 1, verses 15 through 20. He says, "The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authority. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross." And so the modern day American church finds themselves in a very similar situation of needing to be reminded that what they believe is rooted in objective reality, and that there is sufficient evidence to prove their claims about the truth of Christianity. So in When Skeptics Ask, Norman Geisler and Ronald Brooks opened their book with an account of two Christian men, one lamenting why all the fuss about knowing the intellectual arguments for Christianity, stating that he has never needed it, contending that the people he shares the gospel with just don't ask those questions. Then the young man accompanying him blurted out that these are the only kinds of questions he ever gets. The authors go on to state that the two men were engaged in two different ministries, both being valid and necessary, but one focused on evangelism and the other pre-evangelism. Pre-evangelism is defined as helping to remove the obstacles of faith. So rather than just preaching the word of God, pre-evangelism spends more time using reason to explain why objections are groundless. Geisler and Brooks put it this way: before we can share the gospel, we sometimes have to smooth the road, remove the obstacles, and answer the questions that are keeping that person from accepting the Lord. When Skeptics Ask is aimed at providing believers with two things. Number one, assurance that what they believe is true and right, more specifically, that there is no other truth outside of Christianity. And secondly, to provide believers with the tools to do the work of pre-evangelism. And so one of the most helpful sections of the book is found in the appendix. It is titled Reasoning to Christianity from Ground Zero. It is essentially a quick reference outline of the entire book. And the objective of this section is to demonstrate that Christianity is reasonable and that it is true and seeks to base its claims in reality and not in fiction. In this section, Geisler and Brooks list 14 points that demonstrate how Christianity is grounded in reality and therefore true. And so it's important to note from the outset that these 14 points of reasoning center around the acknowledgement of three central points. Number one, the affirmation of self-evident truths. Then it moves secondly to the existence of God based on self-evident truths. And then lastly, the reliability of the Bible as a historical document. So here are the 14 points. Number one, there are self-evident truths, e.g., I exist and logic applies to reality. Number two, truth corresponds to reality. Number three, truth is knowable, and all other views of truth are self-defeating. They cover this in chapter 12. Number four, one can proceed from self-evident truths to the existence of God. There are three principal arguments for the existence of God. They are the argument from creation, which proceeds from the self-evident truth that I exist. Then there's the argument from morals, which proceeds from the self-evident truth that values are undeniable. And then lastly, there's the argument from design, which proceeds from the self-evident truth that design implies a designer. Number five, From these self-evident truths, we can postulate that God is a necessary being. This is called the argument from being, which is covered in chapter 2. Number 6, however, my existence is not necessary, evident from the very definition of a necessary being, who brought all things, everything that is contingent, into existence, which includes me. Number 7, therefore theism is true. There is a necessary being beyond the world who has created the contingent things in the world and intervenes in the world. They cover this in chapter 3. Again, if there is a necessary being beyond the world who has created the contingent things in the world and intervenes in the world, that is, he holds things together in their design, denoting purpose, then the objections from the problem of evil can easily be resolved. And then also the objections to miracles can also be resolved. These are covered in chapters 4 and 5, respectively. Now we can move into the last of our proofs. And so if self-evident truths exist, and it is reasonable to believe in a necessary being who brought all other contingent things into existence, then we can move to test the reliability of the Bible's claims as the source of knowledge of the one true God. So number 8, the Bible is a historically reliable document. And so if history is defined as an objective study of the past, then there is great historical, archaeological, and scientific evidence to confirm the reliability of the Bible. This is covered in chapters 9 and 10. Then it follows that the Bible gives a reliable record of the teaching of Jesus Christ. This now moves us to what Jesus Christ claimed. Number 9, Jesus claimed to be both fully human and fully God. Number 10, he gave evidence to support this claim. That is, the fulfillment of prophecy, his miraculous and sinless life, and his resurrection, which is covered in chapter 6. Therefore, number 11, Jesus is both fully human and fully God. And with our affirmation of a necessary being, whose very essence is perfection, then we can assert that, number 12, whatever God teaches is true. If Jesus provided sufficient evidence that he is God, while recognizing that, number 13, Jesus taught that the Old Testament was the inspired word of God, and he promised the New Testament, then we conclude that, number 14, both the Old and New Testament are the inspired word of God, which they cover in chapter 7. Now, while this is just a brief outline of the arguments for the truth of Christianity, I want to encourage you to go deeper. If you're looking to strengthen your faith, what you believe, I strongly encourage you to add this book to your library and begin studying these proofs in more detail. In the meantime, I encourage you to check out the related videos on self-evident truths, the existence of God, and the reliability of the Bible. Take care.